If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, I am going to go through the basics of the World of Darkness Storyteller system as we learn together how to play Vampire the Dark Ages 20th Anniversary Edition. One of the biggest requests I hear fans make to the World of Darkness HQ team in Stockholm is to do Vampire the Dark Ages 5th edition, when this game is right here. Any polite reminders of that fact are shut down by claims of it being too crunchy and or complicated, which I don't think is true. The community as a whole likes to bash the V20 line for being gatekeeping crunchfest for boomers and power gamers, which is very much not the case and, ironically, total gatekeeping behaviour. So many people enjoy D&D and more recently Pathfinder, which are both notably more crunchy than this game here, and it also presents the idea that crunch means harder to play, get into, or not that fun, which again, I do not believe is the case. Hopefully, by the end of the tutorial, you'll come around to the idea that V20 Dark Ages can be just as, if not more fun, than V5, but just how am I going to do that exactly? Well, I will do my utmost best to break down the basics of Vampire the Dark Ages 20th Anniversary Edition on a mechanical level, using a character sheet I have prepared for the occasion. Now, this won't be a character creation guide, for I have done one already, which you're more than welcome to listen to. It's literally the 21st episode of the podcast. I'm also not going to go over too much of the setting and lore. You can listen to practically every other episode of the podcast to do that. But in order to understand how to play Vampire, we've got to talk about the actual game system. D&D uses the D20 system, named after the fact that most of the actions are determined by a D20, a 20-sided dice. The Warren and Thirsty Sword Lesbians use the Powered by the Apocalypse system, which uses a D6, a 6-sided dice, to determine everything. Vampire the Masquerade and the other World of Darkness games after it uses a system known as the Storytelling system, which would be later be used for the Street Fighter RPG. A modified version of this system, the Revised Storyteller system, was introduced for the Trinity Universe games, as well as the adaptations of the Storyteller system used in Exalted and Scion, the new World of Darkness, now known as the Chronicles of Darkness, later introduced in its own variation on the system, the Storytelling system. But what is it? The Storyteller system requires you to use D10s, which are 10-sided dice. Actions, whether it being tasks or combat, are resolved or determined by forming a dice pool of a small number of these die. If you look at your character sheet, you will see your stats are divided up into different sections, attributes and abilities. In V5, the following system for V20 Dark Ages, abilities are called skills. Most of your actions will revolve around the majority of this character sheet by rolling a number of die that equals the attribute plus an ability. This is against the difficulty level, which is usually 6 unless otherwise stated by the storyteller, the one running the session. This means any number that is from 6 to 9. 5 to 2 is a failure. The 0, the 10, represent a critical success if you have a pair of them, which makes 4 successes rather than 2. If you get a 1, these cancel successes. However, if none of your dice comes up with a success and one or more of these dice are showing a 1, the roll is a botch. If you score at least 1 success, even if that success is cancelled out and the additional 1s remain, it is just a simple failure. A botch is much worse than a normal failure. It's a dramatic misfortune which varies on the scenario, your discipline power, and so much more. And with the basics of the Storyteller system presented, let us put this into practice. Let's have a look at Robert of your Motherton, an ostracized noble, now one of the Leannan bloodline. If you have not heard of this mostly Dark Ages bloodline, feel free to check out my episode on them and the other Gangrel bloodlines. At character creation, Robert has 11 out of 11 blood in their blood points. They rolled a d10 and got a 10, then they added their dot and domain, which was free, which makes 13 in total. Robert, a 12th generation vampire, has a max blood pool of 11. They use one of those blood points to rise for the night, meaning they now have 10, and the rest are deleted from existence. Blood pool, for those who don't know, is essentially this game's mana or magic system, but with vampiric flavourings. A character's blood pool measures how much vitae or vitae the vampire has in their system. The blood pool comprises a number of individual blood points. Each blood point corresponds roughly to 1/10 of the blood in an average adult mortal, a pint or 1/2 litre outside of a human. This is used to, as we discussed moments ago, rising for the night, healing, using your disciplines, your blood-based mythical powers, boosting an attribute for the duration of 3 turns, and much, much more. Blood pool also affects self-control or instinct rolls, which come into play when a character's frenzy becomes imminent. A player may never roll more dice for self-control or instinct rolls than the character has a blood pool. You can work out how hungry a vampire is by doing the simple question of 7 minus self-control or instinct, which for Robert, he is really hungry when their blood pool is down to 5. Whilst vampires are always hungry, he is not too hungry and doesn't need to feed. Now, if he wanted to feed, his method is not bound by a mechanical predator type, as you would find or be encouraged to in V5, but however, the vampire chooses free to use their imagination. A vampire may take up to 3 blood points from a given vessel in a turn. This would usually be a fairly painless moment between predator and prey, meaning there is no role to feed, though some clans and bloodlines are restricted on who and how they feed, in addition to whether their feeding causes pain or not. There is, however, another limit to be mindful of, beyond the actual limitations of the blood pool dictated by the generation. His road of enlightenment, the road of the beast, discourages him from engaging in cruelty for pleasure, and it could be argued that overindulging in one's feeding would count as this. But what is a road? Narratively, roads and the various paths are used by vampires to describe the philosophies that serve as artificial codes of honor and morality for their kindred. The road of humanity is one of these, and in the Dark Ages, there are many others that Cainites can adopt. Mechanically, it is a very important aspect of the game, a primary purpose to suppress or control the beast within the vampire. Every road has 10 ranks, with 10 being near perfectly attuned to the path and 1 being barely in control. These ratings tend to vary throughout a character's own life. Each road has a different hierarchy of sins, which lists what actions mandate a degeneration roll for a character with a given path rating. They are highly nuanced, with many ways of gaining and losing one's rank. In super broad V5 terms, think of it as 10 convictions bound to one idea or principle of your character's relationship between oneself and the beast. But we will touch upon the mechanics of those later, as I think we should see what Robert is up to in a woodland in Norman-era England. Well, it appears he has a mortal strung up by a tree doing some jolly old sacrifice. Oh, those silly pagans.
But Law, didn't you say cruelty for pleasure is a bad thing for those on the road of the beast? And what about killing for pleasure?
And you are absolutely right for both of those. However, there are a couple of points that need to be addressed here. Robert is not doing this for the sake of pleasure, but to use one of his Arkham powers to protect his domain, so it is a matter of survival, especially when the 3rd score or level is not protecting what is yours, so I don't think any ST would argue with that purpose there. In fact, not doing this may damage Robert's standing on the road and may risk losing his road rating. As for killing for pleasure, that is an 8th level on the road, and Robert is on 7, meaning he could kill for pleasure and not risk losing his road score. And with more answers brings more questions. Arkham is the unique discipline of the Lianan bloodline. Arkham is rooted in Coldonic sorcery, which, unlike the old clan Zenitsi, comes naturally to the Lianan. Arkham uses Celtic or Celtic runes and a mortal sacrifice to inflict curses, manipulate the natural world, and buff themselves to be stronger. It works best in the clan's domain and is weakened the further they get away from that 1-mile threshold of theirs. But they are not going anywhere. They are in the woodlands. Robert is using the 1st level power, Consecration of Isus, preparing their sacrifice in the way described on page 232 for a whole scene, so quite a while in game terms. He now makes a dice pool, rolling dexterity, the specific attribute for this power, plus his occult rating with a difficulty rating of the argument power level +4. The level is 1, and 1 plus 4 is 5, meaning the difficulty is 5. No expenditure of blood or willpower is required. There are a couple of interesting merits one can temporarily gain here depending on who and where you sacrifice them, but you need to read that on page 231. Now, let's roll some fucking dice already. So Robert got a 10, an 8, 2 7s, a 6 and a 4, meaning that is a very impressive 5 successes. Wowzers! This is not a critical success because there is only one 10. Now, for the remainder of the scene, anyone that isn't a Lianon suffers a -2 penalty to all dice rolls from distraction and physical interference from plant matter, as well as being made to do a dexterity plus athletics roll each turn to avoid 3 dice of bashing damage as the plants strike back. This is pretty handy, as a bravely foolish knight has arrived at the scene to defeat the foul man-witch, as the people of the nearby village protest Robert is, meaning we now enter combat. As we enter combat and enter initiative, both NPC and PC roll 1d10 and add their initiative rating, which is determined by adding the dexterity and wits together, which are both attributes. For Robert, their dex is 3 and their wit is 2, so that is 5 plus whatever they roll on the d10, which just so happens to be a 5. As for the debatably noble knight, his dex is 3 but the wit is 4, making 7. They rolled a 10, and 7 plus 10 is 17, which means the knight goes first. Oh no! Now, if in the event of a tie, the one with the higher initiative rating would go first, so the knight would still fact first anyway. However, the knight is wearing chainmail armor and holds a saber, which is all fairly important as each applies damage modifiers, either adding or reducing depending on the item and the situation in question. The armor has a rating of 5 and a penalty of 3, meaning 3 is subtracted from any dex-related scores or rolls, depending on how organized your ST is, meaning that 17 actually becomes 14, which is still putting the knight in the advantage spot here. Armor, by the way, does not protect a vampire's weakness from fire and sunlight. The knight will attempt to cut down the man with his sword. He will roll his dexterity plus melee against Robert's dexterity and athletics, which isn't a fantastic pull for him. If Robert had celerity, that could help here, and that works a little differently when compared to V5. That has no separate powers not until level 6, but celerity can be used to add an additional die to dex-based rolls, including initiative, providing you spend the adequate blood points. Robert can spend a blood point to raise an attribute by 1 dot for 3 turns, which they will do here, as that's a reflexive action. Now they have a pool of 6 rather than 5. The knight would have a pool of 7, but thanks to the Argon roll from Robert previously, that pool of the knight now becomes 5 due to the forest essentially becoming alive. Robert will spend a willpower point to net them 1 automatic success that cannot be cancelled out by wands. This puts the two on a slightly more even playing field. The knight, after applying the armor penalty, got a botch, whilst Robert got 2 9s, 3 8s and a 1, which removes the wands of the successes, totaling 4 successes with the dice, but when you add the 1 from the willpowered expenditure, that becomes 5. With the knight's botch, the ST then describes in tragically hilarious detail how the knight trips foot over ass, dropping his sword as tree branches attack and trip up the knight. This would be a narratively appropriate moment to have the trees attack the knight. As per the Argon rules, the knight makes dex plus athletics to avoid the hit. The assumed difficulty is 6, but the ST will say that given the previous botch, it is now an 8, as it is harder to roll in armor on the floor in the dark. And remember, the knight has 2 less dice as well, leaving the knight with 4 dice to roll. However, the knight's armor has a rating of 5 and a penalty of 3. Again, the knight gets no successes, but at least there isn't a botch, so the knight would take 3 bashing damage. But what does that mean exactly? Well, there are 3 types of damage in V20 Dark Ages: bashing, lethal, and aggravated. Bashing are punches and kicks and those sorts of things. Lethal are arrow shots, swords, and anything that would be deemed lethal for a mortal. Aggravated damage are supernatural things that hurt vampires like fire, sunlight, and werewolf bites. The chainmail armor of the knight has a rating of 5, meaning that is added to the knight's soak pool, which is their stamina plus the armor rating of 5. A vampire with fortitude can add their dot to this as well. With the large soak pool of 9, the knight rolls 10, 2 9s, 2 8s, a 5, 4, 2 and 1, which leaves them with 4 successes, which means the treat does not actually harm the hunter, the armor protecting them in this instance. But now it is Robert's turn, who claims the sword as their own, which will be far more useful than the little dagger from their noble royalty days. Robert here now has a few options. They could strike the knight of the sword, resulting in another dex and melee against dex and athletics roll. Imagine if Robert won, let's say with 4 successes. Only 1 is needed to hit, leaving 3 left over. Those 3 would be added to the weapon's damage modifier, which for this sword, and the strength is 2, so Robert has 2 to roll. 2 plus 2 is 4, quick maths, plus the 3 from the initial roll, which is 7, plus an additional die from the blood point being spent previously, resulting in 8. Robert rolls and got 6, which would be soaked by the hunter's soak pool of 9, 4 from the stamina and 5 from the armor. The knight would get 4 successes from the soaking pool, 6 from the attack, take 4 from the soak, leaves 2, and the 2 would be the amount of lethal damage the knight would take. This may potentially have been more if Robert possessed potence and they could add that to their physical stats. If Robert wanted to talk instead of attacking, they could use their presence discipline to use awe and make themselves more pleasing to learn more about the knight, where they came from, and possibly add the knight to their herd, or make them a ghoul, or even embrace them. If Robert's road rating was higher, they would give a more menacing presence, which may help or hinder rolls here, depending on what you wanted to do. Not all roads give off this effect, but the Road of the Beast does. On the topic of road, letting the knight live and the logical answer of running away would actually go against the 4th score of the Road of the Beast, which is failing to kill when survival is on the line. Whilst fleeing may be a sensible idea, it would also count as sinning the 3rd ethic, not protecting what is yours. Again, these are subjective and down to the ST's decision. In any case, this would be committing a sin, and there is a mechanic to determine how this is resolved. Robert would roll their conscience or conviction on the character sheet, both taking up the same spot. The Road of the Beast uses conviction. The base difficulty is 6, but the difficulty is increased between the sin and the character's road rating. Robert is 7, the sin of the first example. Failing to kill when survival is on the line is 4. The difference between the two, 7 and 4, is 3. When added to 6, makes 9. 3 plus 6 is 9. Willpower cannot be used to net successes here, for obvious reasons. In this example, Robert got 8, 6, 2 5s and a 2, which is a failure, meaning the road score would decrease by 1, or one of your virtue scores that isn't courage decreases depending on what the ST decides. I will, however, let you decide what Robert would do, as I feel I have covered the basics on how to play V20 Dark Ages. The only thing I haven't really discussed is roleplay and all the political shawazzle, which I've kinda covered in previous episodes of the podcast. I hope this has been helpful for you, and if there's anything about Vampire the Masquerade's mechanics you wish to learn about, do get in touch via the YouTube comment or social media posts. I would love to be able to come up with more helpful content for you all. Just check the other episodes first and see if I haven't covered them already. Now, this means you have to listen to them all, which is really my master plan coming to full effect. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.